And we are live.
Sounds like a dog, is it?
Yes, some life happening outside my window.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I consider it approval.
Yes, totally. Well, Dr. John Dominic Crossan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's good to be able to be with you on these interesting circumstances.
All the way across the country, from San Diego to Orlando.
Two sunny places, though. That's good.
Exactly.
Well, seriously, thank you. We got to connect last year. And of course, I've been a fan of your work since I first started watching it when I was 12 on the History Channel. And
Really?
you popped up on my documentaries. But the first thing I wanted to ask is just how in the world are you doing in these crazy days of COVID-19?
Well, to be honest with you, compared to what some other people are going through, I think my wife and I are having it very easy. We're staying in. We can do that. One of the first things I did was, since we both go to the gym pretty much every day, first thing in the morning, we've a marvelous gym here attached to the hospital in Claremont in Florida. So I went on the web and I rented a treadmill for reality, because I had a feeling this wasn't going to be just a week away from the gym. So we did that, and then we're going out as little as possible, I would say, just for not just personal safety, but also for social safety, getting groceries delivered if we can and things like that. So basically we're staying in, which is, to be very honest with you, for ourselves, at our stage in life, not really a great difficulty. I mean, it gives me more time to write, let's put it that way.
Totally. And I was thinking, you began, or part of your spiritual journey was as a monk. So you have a little bit of experience with this kind of thing, yeah?
Yeah, really. I'm used to silence. I'm used to staying in one place, actually. I was a monk for 19 years. I went in when I was, 16, way back in Ireland in 1950, and I left in 69. I finally decided that celibacy was vastly overrated. So I left the monastery, but I loved it, wanted to take it all with me. So my name, my civil name is John. That's all that's on my passports and stuff. But my monastic name was Dominic. So when I left the monastery, I stuck that name in the middle. It has no legal standing, but everyone who knows me as Dominic and Dom, because I wanted to take everything, with that one exception, from the monastery with me. And I loved my life there.
Totally. And do you still maintain some of those kind of monastic practices you learned at all in your current life?
I do, but honestly, they're almost so embedded, capacity for silence, which in days when you used to travel, remember you used to get in the plane and go places and do things like that? Yeah, like in the last century. I find I can be very silent even among noise. Do you know what I mean? I have no problem sitting with my computer working in an airport terminal with all sorts of noise. So I took, I think, a great capacity for interior silence and focus. Things I think I got really from the monastery, simply without being told, now this is what you have to do. It just became second nature, because I went in when I was only 16.
Yeah.
So, it formed me in a way.
Totally. Yeah. And so we're of course, you have this background of this monastic life, obviously, somebody deeply embedded in the Christian faith. And then you've evolved into being one of the world's leading voices on the study of the historical Jesus. But what I find so compelling about you is that you are able to bring, in a way that a lot of other scholars on Jesus aren't, that side of personal faith and understanding the religious world of Christianity, and the historical facts about Jesus, which sometimes are quite unsettling to people of faith. And you bring those together so well. I wonder what your journey was like, and what do you think about the person Jesus? Is he divine in your personal spiritual life? Like, how do you view that?
I think going back to that monastery, it was my superiors in the monastery, of course, who decided to make me a scholar. I went in to be an obedient monk, like in a way, like you go into the army. You don't tell them too much what you want. So I went in to do what I was told. I had a vow of obedience, and they had said, hey, you got 5 years of Greek and 5 years of Latin from a high school in Ireland, the classical high school. We don't have anyone like that over here. So you're going on to be a professor. And I said, sure, whatever. So they made that decision for me. Now, the other thing that coming out of Ireland, I had never really learned about the Bible in a fundamentalist way, because Catholics in Ireland didn't read the Bible. I can't even tell you when I first saw physically a Bible, a text. The big book growing up was the Roman Catholic Missal. And then even in the monastery, it was the breviary. So the volume, nobody waved it at me and said, this is kind of a magic volume. So I went into it after 5 years of Greek and Latin. And the first thing I used, I thought about it exactly the same way as I did when I was reading Virgil or when I was reading, Homer. I got the story. I didn't get uptight about, do I really think Zeus intervened and did this in the Trojan War? I got it as a story. And I figured there was transcendental forces. So I could love the story or reject the story, of course, without getting uptight about, do I really think this part actually happened? Or do I think this part could be metaphorical or symbolical? Simply because of that background. I got used to that. When I was 11, we were reading in first year Latin, Caesar's Gallic Wars. And, I don't know if I believed every single thing that Caesar said. I figured he was getting to write the story and he was slaughtering my Celtic forebears. So yeah, I took it with a little grain of salt, but it didn't become a crisis for me. So I've never really had a crisis of faith, to be honest with you. I take it for granted that these people 2,000 years ago had something important to say. That's a prejudice, simply because it's been around for 2,000 years. So anyone who's been around for 2,000 years, I'll read very carefully. And then I make my own decision. Okay, that's outdated. I understand it was valid for you 2,000 years ago, but it's just no longer valid for me. Thank you very much. Or I'll say, well, maybe there's insights here that are perennially valid about human nature. So I never had a real crisis between history and faith, to be honest with you. I disappoint the media a lot of times because they want to know, did you lose your faith and kind of find it back? Not really.
Yeah. I think that's a gift, honestly, from so many people who come from the Catholic tradition that I know. There's seems just to be a little bit more broadness within the tradition, even though there are some really rough edges. There's that broadness to be able to hold the width of someone like you and somebody like a Father Richard Rohr, and then also someone like Scott Hahn or Robert Barron, like the two, not to polarize.
The danger for us as Roman Catholics is that we have not biblical fundamentalism, but papal fundamentalism. That's the danger. So if you have somebody who's infallible, you don't need a book.
Yeah.
You have to be very careful that you don't just simply park biblical fundamentalism and then take on papal fundamentalism.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to dig into that a little bit deeper, though, I wonder, what does spirituality look like for you today? So you didn't have a crisis of faith. Your faith has always kind of been broader than normal, whatever that means. But what does your day-to-day view of the world and life and God and all of that look like? I know that's a big question, but
no, I really kind of locate myself insofar as I can locate myself. I mean, I'm quite happy when other people, at least somewhat sympathetically, tell me about myself. But it really is where I try to track Christianity, at least my Christianity, with human evolution. And where I see Christianity tracking, or biblical Christianity especially, tracking well with human evolution. For example, leave Christianity aside for a moment. If I look at evolution, it seems to me terribly fair and just. I mean, I wouldn't be fair to viruses. Let me be very clear about this. If I was running this operation, I wouldn't be equally clear to viruses and human beings. But I look at evolution and I figured, okay, it seems like everyone is given a chance, a fair chance. Now, we have brains. So if we want to spend our money on military preparedness instead of medical preparedness, that's our decision. Don't blame the viruses.
Yeah.
They have their thing to do. So then I look at the biblical tradition and I see all the way through. Now, this is not just the New Testament, it's much more the Old Testament. they look at the experience of the home, and they see that homes are just, that people are supposed to get enough in the home, that you don't have half your kids starving and half overfed, and that sick children get special care. They say all of that. And they came up with this brilliant idea in the Bible. I think it's the greatest idea anyone ever had, that God must be like running kind of a big house. God is like the householder of the world house. So that's where they got this brilliant idea in the Bible that everyone should get a fair share. They knew nothing about civil rights or human rights or anything like that. They just said, well, it's like a great big house, and God's the householder, however they're imagining God. And that makes sense to me. That seems to be the way evolution works. That seems to be the way we should be running the world. So I find those two vectors, maybe, where they cross is where my own faith is.
Yeah.
If I'm talking to people who couldn't care less about Bible, Jesus, Christianity, I'd say, fine. Could we talk about human evolution? Just give me the last, in fact, give me the last 6,000 years. If I'm even talking to a fundamentalist who says, well, everything was only 6,000 years old, fine. Can I talk to you about the last 6,000 years from Mesopotamia and how human evolution has been doing? And how it took us only 3,000 years to get from an iron sword to an atom bomb. We're good at some stuff. We really are. So that's where I am. It's extremely communal. It's extremely universal, to be honest. But it's based on evolution and how Christianity tracks with evolution.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And one of the things that has kind of been blowing my mind recently is the realization that obviously humans have only been on Earth for a relatively short time, if we take the evolutionary perspective. But even in that time, we've seen about 4 to 6, depending on who you look at scholar-wise, major religious movements rise up, major empires rise up, and then fall. And it occurred to me that Christianity, coming up on kind of our 2,000-year mark, it's quite possible that this whole Christian movement also could rise and fall. And we would think of it in the same way that we think of paganism in the Greco-Roman world. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think there's something special about Christianity that might make it endure longer, or?
The danger is that Christianity, unfortunately, because it has been around so long, and because in the 4th century, Christianity was faced with the terrible trial that Judaism never had in the past. What do you do when the emperor joins you? What do you do when Constantine puts on a halo and sits down at Nicaea and tells the bishops, you're now in charge? I mean, I'm in charge of you, of course, dear bishops, but you're in charge of the world. That's heady stuff. In some sense, I often wonder, it would have been a lot better if Judaism had never revolted against Rome and Judaism had become the religion of the world. They'd have to adopt, of course, certain things. I'm sure they would have adopted, but they had much more experience with empires than we had. They knew emperors for 500 years before we ran into the Roman Empire. And we didn't have much experience. We opposed the Roman Empire for 300 years, and then it gave in. And the huge question, of course, is who converted whom? Mm. That's the serious question for Christianity. Now, the greatness of Christianity has been this, that we got the New Testament written down early. And so we had Jesus down there. Now, if we had no traditions written down, say, until the time of Constantine, and Constantine said, okay, now we need a Bible, we'd have had a lovely Bible in which the function of Christianity is to support the Holy Roman Empire of Christianity. And we would say that all the problems that were in the past were simply because they weren't Jewish or Christian empires. Now we have a Christian empire, empire is lovely, and we're all set. That's the lethal infection, let me put it that way, our disease that we have as Christians. That's our virus, to use it. And we have to get back and out of that we are not here to support injustice, empire, inequality, because our genes won't let us do it unless we abandon it.
Yeah, totally. And I think for so many people, that's such a profound realization when they start digging into the historical Jesus, how Christianity developed. It seems so obvious once you see it, but how Jesus really did have this anti-imperial message, and how quickly, I would even say, and I think I've heard you say, but like the Apostle Paul, by the time he comes around and begins shaping Christianity in the way that he has, it does look pretty radically different in many ways than the Jewish Christianity of Jesus, and as some scholars would say, of James and the church that was in Jerusalem as Paul's going out and spreading the gospel to the world. It seems like there's quite a different message between Paul and Jesus. Can you talk about how that came about?
Yeah, because I've written so much about that, really to deny that. Now, when I'm talking about Paul, let me be very clear. I'm talking about the 7 authentic letters that scholars all accept as Paul. That's Romans, Galatians, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Philippians, Philemon, and 1st Thessalonians. Those are the Pauline letters. And what's really weird about that for most people is that he doesn't seem to be talking like Jesus at all. And he's not. Jesus is talking to his fellow peasants from Galilee, telling vibrant parables, for example. Paul is working with the Roman imperial theology to turn it on its head. For example, if you know Roman imperial theology, forget Jesus and Paul for a second. The claim is that Caesar is divine, that Caesar is Son of God, that Caesar is Lord and Savior of the world, that Caesar is Redeemer from sin, by the way, and all of these marvelous titles. Now, all of a sudden, Christians run into these titles in Paul and say, well, that's weird. Jesus didn't go around saying, I'm the Lord, I'm the Lord, I'm the Lord, I'm Son of God. So when Paul is saying this sort of stuff, wow, he's deviating from Jesus. No, what he's doing is putting Jesus into, if I could make this as a joke, a Roman toga, as it were, and making him and claiming for him every important title that Caesar held. That is called high treason. That is why, first of all, of course, Jesus died by the Romans and Paul will die by the Romans. The Romans weren't brutal. They just killed people for entertainment. They understood, quite correctly, by the way, that Jesus was a non-violent threat to Roman law and order. The reason I know that is because Roman law said, of course, if you were a violent threat, we'll grab you and all your top lieutenants and crucify you in a nice row so everyone gets the idea. If you create turmoil among the people or stir up the people, we will crucify the leader. We won't bother with the lieutenants or the main followers. We'll take out the leader. That's what they did, for example, to Jesus. That's what they did to Ignatius of Antioch. That's what they did. So if the only thing I knew about Jesus, and it is, by the way, the one thing I'm as sure about as I'm sure of anything historical can ever be, Jesus was executed, but his closest followers weren't rounded up. That tells me that Pilate's judgment, which I think was right, by the way, from his point of view, is that Jesus is a non-violent threat to Roman law and order. And we'll take him out, and of course that'll solve it. Everything will be gone. And they would have said, and if we have to come back 5 years later, we do the same again. Can you guys get the message? So you would really learn a huge amount if you take seriously that Jesus was executed. And don't get into apologetics. Well, Pilate just really wanted to let him off because he was such a nice guy and he was a kind of a Hamlet figure and he couldn't make up his mind. And it was those bad Jews who did everything. That's bunkum in plain language. It's in one sense, the gospel stories are mocking Pilate because to listen to anyone else would be ridiculous. A Roman judge should never listen to anyone else. They've vaunted Roman justice would be, of course, that Pilate, and Pilate got it right. So they're mocking him. And they're saying, of course, that the high priests were jealous and everything else. This is apologetics and polemics, of course, within Judaism. So we know a huge amount about Jesus. We know that he opposed Roman law and order, which, to be fair, was simply the normalcy of civilization in first century Israel. It wasn't like some monstrous, as if it were the Nazis, 2,000 years ahead of time. It was the normalcy of civilization, which has always worked by victory and by controlling others. So we know a huge amount of Jesus, and he makes sense to me on a totally historical point of view. Now, let me be clear. I can read Jesus and understand him completely as a historian, and then have to say, now, do I accept his vision as a way of life? And if I say yes, that makes me a Christian. I could say, now, I know everything about him, and I think Pilate got it right. We don't want any nonviolent revolutions around here. We want law and order. So you transit from being a good historian to being a faithful Christian, not by changing history, but by saying, I accept Jesus's vision for the best vision of the world I can imagine. Not just for me, not just for me at all, but for me and for the world. And I would tell in any way I could that that's a vision for the world. Now, if somebody has that vision and never heard of Jesus, that's fine. That's fine with me. Yeah. I would not say, well, you have to talk about Jesus. Nope. If that is your vision, then we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah. So one of the questions related to this, I'm asking all the questions that I think would be on people's mind, but also slightly unsettling for those of us who are in the Christian religious world. It seems that the divinity of Jesus, that idea of Jesus being a God, it really comes much later. We don't see it so much in the writings of James. There's not a lot of evidence that it was in the very earliest Christian movements, which was a largely Jewish movement. How does that become developed? And is it right to think that it's a Pauline invention, or at least an evolution of Christian theology by the time it gets to Paul, or was there another source for that?
Let me put it to you this way. If I was in a court of law with a judge saying, I'm tired of all this, backing, just yes or no, Dr. Crossan, yes or no, is Jesus divine for you? My answer is yes. Now, what I'm thinking inside is, because, dear judge, I understand what it meant in the first century, and I bet you don't. Now, I won't say that. In the first century, Greek and Roman religion understood this. If a human being, now we're talking about a real human being, you stick a pin in him, he goes, ouch. If a real human being has done something of extraordinary value for the human race, that's the job profile of a divine human being. If a human being has done something of extraordinary value for the human race, that person is divine because that person has revealed, it's usually male, to be honest with you, because that person has revealed what divinity is like. So, for example, they could say, and they would say, and they did say, Aesculapius is divine because he reveals he has invented healing. What a gift from the gods. So the gods are on the side of healing. Augustus had brought peace to the Roman Empire after 20 years of savage civil war that almost destroyed it. He brought peace. They said he's divine. They said he's a god. They really did. Forget Jesus. This is before Jesus was ever even born. Yeah. They said, and we have it on inscriptions, the God, son of God as well, the son of Julius Caesar, but also a God, born of Apollo. All the titles that Paul uses for Jesus, not Messiah, of course, but all the other ones that we think of, divine, son of God, Lord, were originally the titles of Caesar. Yep. Now, I'm not simply saying, well, they just picked up local titles. I'm saying that in the Roman world, it made sense to think of Caesar sitting up there on the Palatine Hill in Rome, running the world, as they said, to be a god. That makes sense. Program for the world is divine. How else is he so successful? Along comes first of all, a peasant from Galilee, from the Nazareth Ridge, a nobody in plain language. And they start saying for him, no, not your guy, but our guy is divine, son of God, Lord, Savior of the world. Now, the first century answer to that, at the time of Paul should be, not our answer. Well, I don't know if I believe that type of stuff. First century open-minded pagan would say, wow, but how can we have two saviors of the world when there's only one world? How I can see how you kind of many gods. That's no problem. So if you want to say Jesus is God and Caesar's God, fine. But he's the Lord.
Hmm.
And you're saying your guy is the Lord. So of course the Romans immediately knew this was treason. They were not just saying, well, this is just our little Lord. He's just our little son of God. We all have our little ones. They were saying your guy ain't. Now, the first century question had to be, seriously, if you think of these two gentlemen as candidates for the presidency and you ask them their platform, Caesar would have said, my platform, which is working very well, by the way, is peace through victory. That's the way you get it. You worship the gods, of course, and when they're on your side, you go forth to war, then you have victory, and we get the gorgeous Pax Romana, and look at it, it's all here, our armies are on the periphery, and we have peace in the world. That's my platform. Along comes this Paul and says, we Jews have been around for 500 years with you empires. You all come and go. And you always seem to be worse than the one before. We thought Alexander's, phalanxes were the worst thing we could imagine in Daniel 7. Now we got the Roman legions. You guys haven't brought peace. You've only brought a lull. A lull. And the next round is going to be worse. We have a different program. It's called peace through justice. And by that, he meant distributive justice, of course. When everyone gets their share, we have peace on earth. Now, those are two programs. So naturally, the Roman program is going to say Caesar is divine. His vision should run the world. They're saying the same about Jesus. That's what those words meant in the first century. They really didn't mean that Caesar had popped down from heaven one day and said, here I am, I'm God. They didn't mean that Jesus popped down from heaven one day and said, surprise, Mary, I'm divine. No, they were making commitments of faith to a way of life.
Yeah.
I think they were absolutely right, because I think the Caesar option, peace through victory, is bankrupt. Because what happens steadily, is we have to get more and more violence to make it work. We've never, ever created a weapon we didn't use. Maybe you can argue about the hydrogen bomb, I suppose. And it took us only 3,000 years to get from iron swords to atomic bombs.
Right.
We're really very good. That's why today in America, I'm not even criticizing it, we have all sorts of military preparedness. We're ready to blow up the world a dozen times, but we're not even ready to heal the world once. We don't have enough medical equipment to heal ourselves.
Well,
but we have more than enough medical equipment to blow ourselves up to kingdom come and the world with us.
Yeah.
I think maybe we might want to think that a little bit.
Totally.
It's not an anti-military statement. It really isn't. It's a statement of, do we think our priorities and our balances might be a little bit just to have military preparedness to blow up the world only once and medical preparedness to heal the world only once?
Totally. Wow.
Anyway.
So the last one I'll push on Jesus and divinity and all of that is, and you kind of answered it, but if Jesus were to walk into, and this is an absurd question on one hand, if Jesus were to look at Christianity today, if Jesus were to walk into the Vatican today, if Jesus were to come into my church on Sunday morning, would Jesus recognize what was going on as something familiar to him, something he wanted to happen?
No, I think he would have wept. I think he would weep. I mean, some of it, of course, he would understand. Yes. Yeah, he would see continuities. But I think if he looked across 2,000 years, as let us imagine him doing that, I would think he would see again and again glimpses of that inaugural vision coming back. We never managed to kill it. And as I said, the reason we didn't is because we got stuck with the New Testament. before it was too late.
Yep.
In other words, anyone who really says, okay, let me try and understand this now. I want to understand what this guy did that got him executed. Let me take a very simple question. What got him executed? Well, it says the high priests were jealous. Is that really a good explanation? The Romans didn't execute people. If the Romans were mad at you and you were bothered, they just booted your tail out of town, to put it bluntly. They didn't waste execution on people that were a nuisance.
Yeah.
They didn't. Execution was for people who were public nuisances and endangered the law and order. So if Jesus came back, what would surprise him? Well, let me put it this way. If Jesus came back today, here's what we would do to him. We wouldn't crucify him. We don't do that sort of tacky stuff anymore. What we would do is put him on a television program with 4 or 5 other people who think they're going to save the world. And we'd laugh them off the stage. We'd laugh them off the stage. Maybe we'd say, oh, just one more superhero. Good for a movie, or good for a series of movie.
Yeah.
Jesus Volume 1, Jesus Volume 2. We have more sophisticated ways of silencing people today than the crude way of executing them. And they're much more effective.
Totally. Do you have hope that as human history evolves, as world history evolves, that Jesus's vision of the kingdom of God, that vision of the world that he was trying to create, do you have hope that that can become a reality?
I do, honestly. I really do. I mean, I know if I was in an argument with somebody, not an argument, but a debate, like where you could choose either side, and they said, well, the world is doomed, or the world which will be saved. I know I might lose the debate, but I'm really wondering at the moment whether something might happen when this virus recedes, or whether it'll just be like, the great flu in 1918, 1919, we'll bury 100,000, 100 million, whatever it was, people, and go right back to where we were before. Yeah. I really hope for ourselves in America that we might take seriously that question that I asked, why we can destroy the world so many times, but can not even heal it once. And I'm talking about healing it just for the moment. I'm talking about a virus, not even the healing the way Jesus did. That maybe maybe it might ask us about our priorities and about our balances, even not even priorities. So it seems to me that, we almost got to the point everywhere that facts don't matter anymore. And then all of a sudden, that tiny little virus, I want to think the greatest powers in the world used to be China and America. Now we have a third power in the world, a virus. And the other two are impotent before it. I mean, until we start doing so. So maybe that will change us a little bit, I hope. Yeah. And it's sad that it takes something like this to jar us out of the unreality that facts don't matter, that your opinion's as good as mine, and it's all perception, and it's all virtual reality. Yeah. No, really not.
Yeah, I share that hope with you. It's been incredible. I'm sure you've seen the images. This is the first time in human history we've been able, during a pandemic like this, to be able to look at how the world itself is healing, in the sense the smog from Los Angeles is gone and China has cleared up the air. And it's such a reminder that first, all of this is possible. We can end global warming.
It is. Yeah. It's possible.
Totally. And that
we can be forced to do it.
Yeah.
And by something that we never really thought about. We never thought a virus might do it.
And the political, it's not to get overly political, but the idea of providing medical care for it, like, we're being forced to do it in this moment. And it really does feel divine in a sense. And I hope we do wake up to these realities.
Yeah, imagine if somebody said, well, all the rich people can protect themselves, so they'll be safe. No, not really. The most dangerous place is in the city. And that was true in ancient Rome, as well as anywhere else. It was much safer to be a peasant up on top of the Nazareth Ridge when an epidemic came than to be in the gorgeous city of Rome.
Yeah, totally. And I want to touch on this. We talked about this last year. We had the chance to do a couple events here in San Diego, but you had a book come out about Easter, and some beautiful art from around the ancient world relating to Easter. I'm going to start with the basic question, and then I want you to talk a bit about the book and let people know about. It's an incredible book and it's beautiful and it shares some amazing insights about how the ancient church viewed resurrection. But can you give us a succinct understanding of how you look at the Christian story of the resurrection of Jesus? What is going on there and what's its utility for us today as Christians?
All right, the first thing is I think of the execution and the resurrection as two sides of a coin. You cannot have a coin with only one side. The Jorge Luis Borges imagined it one time, and I think it then fell to the ground and I couldn't find it. But two sides of the one coin, and we're not good. In fact, we can never see two sides of the one coin without mirrors. So we're not good holding on to a dialectic in our mind. Two things, you must think of these at the same time. I had to say execution and resurrection. I didn't say resurrection, execution. So execution of Jesus, as I just said, is a fact. He was a historical fact, as far as I'm concerned. He was executed for nonviolent resistance to Roman law and order. Resurrection is a metaphor. But when people say to me, oh, it's just a metaphor, I know we have lost the story because metaphor creates reality. If you live it, for example, to take the most horrible example I could think of, the 1,000-year Reich of Hitler was a metaphor. People started to live it. It lasted 12 years. Bad metaphors can destroy us. Good metaphors can save us. But we as human beings live by metaphor. You know, when they're big enough, we don't call them metaphor. We say that's just reality. It's all metaphorically based. To see it this way, even democracy is a metaphor. Let us imagine this and let us live this way. Wow, it seems to be working. It's not working too well at the moment. Plutocracy seems to be. So when I say a metaphor, it's a challenge to live. What it means for me is that let me talk about myself as a moment, take that vision of Jesus as nonviolent revolution as the salvation of the world. I do not believe, I don't mean for a Christian, we must all become Christians. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is that I cannot see anything else that will save us from violence except nonviolence. I cannot see the spiral of violence, I'm talking about the last 6,000, 10,000 years of history, being stopped by greater violence. That has been our delusion. If I really could get control of the big enough empire, well, okay, we can only have America and China, but if we could get a super empire that could control, we've always had the delusion that victory or somehow will save us. So it's a metaphor for me. Now, if nobody lives it, it's not a metaphor, it's just a joke or something. It's just a joke. So the challenge of Christianity is to live the metaphor of resurrection and to make that vision of Jesus valid. If it happens, this is where I bring out in evolution again. If it happens for me, I can talk about it as the salvation of the world. And again, I say it doesn't mean you have to be baptized and become a Christian. It just means you better take the normalcy of what I'm going to call increasing or escalatory violence. Let me use that as a hyphenated word, escalatory violence. In other words, the experience of the last 10,000 years. Civilization based on escalatory violence. If that's the future of the world, I don't see how it won't keep escalating until we eventually destroy ourselves. So resurrection is a metaphor for me, which if we live. Now, where I saw that in the book was that in the Western theology and iconography of image, Jesus comes out of the tomb looking pretty much like a classic superhero. Here I am, I'm going to save the world. In fact, I have saved the world. In the Eastern theology, now Eastern Christianity is what I'm talking about, all across Eastern Christianity, Jesus never comes out alone. He comes out holding Adam and Eve. Now, Adam and Eve, of course, in the biblical tradition, are the human race. They're not just two nice guys, that Jesus is taking special care of. They're the human race. So in the Eastern tradition, the resurrection is about the salvation of the human race. You can see it on the cover of our book. It's called Resurrecting Easter. And that magnificent image there is from the Kora Museum. Used to be a church, then a mosque, now a museum in Istanbul. And as you can see, with his left hand, Jesus is grasping Eve. With his right hand, he's grasping Adam, and he's wrenching them out of their sarcophagi. It's kind of lost in our names at the bottom. He's wrenching them out of their sarcophagi. And all around him are a host of other people. You can identify Abel on the right if you're facing the book. He has his staff. He's the first martyr of the Old Testament, you might say. And on the far side, looking like he needs a shave and a haircut, is John the Baptist, the first martyr of the New Testament. And Jesus is taking the human race out of death. Now, it's not about hell. It's about Hades, which is the place of death. So this magnificent image is of a human being, Jesus, and you may notice he is in some cases carrying the cross. He isn't there because he's using his two hands, but he often has wounds that you can see. So it is the executed one, the one executed for nonviolent revolution, I put it bluntly, is the one who will save the human race. That's the vision of Christianity. And it's a program. It's not just about a person.
Yeah.
It's the incarnation of a program, to put it bluntly. That's the way the Romans also saw Caesar. Caesar had brought peace, so he was the incarnation of peace on earth. This is an alternative vision for peace on earth.
Totally.
And it will not work, of course, if nobody lives it. That's like saying, well, how would nonviolent revolution have worked for Martin Luther King if he thought, well, this is a nice idea, but you could get killed doing this, so I'm not trying this. You'd have to live it out. That took a lot of individuals with great courage.
Wow. I love that. And I see on our comment feeds, people are really loving that idea of living into the metaphor. And what I love about that also is...
Sorry, excuse me.
All good.
It's not contagious. It's not allergies.
Glad we're social distancing still, though.
Social distancing is safe.
But whether you're more conservative or more progressive, I think that way of viewing the resurrection is truly universal. Even if you do believe it's a literal historical event, it still carries that metaphor quality of, well, we've got to live the resurrection. I think even Paul kind of talks about that.
And I would say, most Christians, most evangelical Christians, for example, claim the most important word out there is God so loved the world. Now, if God loved the world, of course, I'm in the world, you're in the world, we're all in the world. So we're in but I wouldn't want to say God so loved me, because I could focus just on me and forget everyone else. We're learning that at the moment. So when I see this, God so loved, this makes sense to me. If God so loved the world, then I want to see living into the metaphor that includes Adam and Eve coming out. I think it is the most extraordinarily magnificent video bite. That's the only word I can use it. I saw it the first time in Cappadocia in 2002 in a rock cut church cut into the tufa, like a little miniature cathedral. And I could see all around it, all the images of Jesus. I could recognize the nativity, the baptism, every single one, all the way to the crucifixion, no problem. Then next to the crucifixion, I see this extraordinary image of Jesus bending down and taking Adam by the hand. It was just Adam in this first one. And he's pulling him out and he's bending over. It's so gentle. It's so delicate. It's not even like the one on the cover of the book where he's kind of striding forward. He's bending over like a doctor over a patient, but he's got Adam by the hand and you can see their hands are grasped together. It's not the distance, between the hand of Adam and God and that magnificent ceiling of Michelangelo, that the gap is closed. It's like the new creation, the you can see the wound on the hand, the executed hand of Christ is grasping the hand of the human race to take them out together. I find it downright thrilling. It gave me chills the first time I saw it. I began to understand it. I didn't understand it the first time. I just thought it was a bit weird, to be honest with you. I was looking, where's the resurrection? Where's the resurrection? I want to see our guy coming out, superhero. Yeah. It wasn't there because that's the Eastern vision.
Totally.
So any Christian, I would say, if you are a Christian, at least know that there is the Western vision and the Eastern vision. Don't act as if the Western vision was simply all of Christianity. That would be, to put it bluntly, simple ignorance.
Yeah.
At least know that there are these two, and that the Eastern has chosen one, the Western has chosen the other, and the Western one goes along an awful lot with our acute individualism and our superheroism, whereas the Eastern, much closer, of course, to the time of the gospel, is much more communal and universal. It's about God loving the world.
Yeah. And I thought that insight is so profound and so necessary for the Western church today. And I do think we see an awakening, slowly but surely, of how this Western individualism, as it relates to Christianity, has actually steered us to the place where we're at today, where we can blow up the world, but we can't heal the world. And when we begin to think in that Eastern way of collective resurrection and God's collective love.
And Bren, it's also extraordinary. I don't want to make anything more of this than the way it is. But all of this happens to us Christians before Easter. We're all at home. We have time to think. We're not crowded into churches, maybe where we will sing and do exactly what we always do, and we do what everyone else does, and that's beautiful. I'm not. I would never have planned to empty the churches for Easter. I really wouldn't. No, but when it happens, it forces us to think very clearly. We have time to think, and think of a lot of things, but this especially is a good time for Christians to think.
Totally. Yeah. People have said this is the lentiest Lent they've ever had, and I think it's good.
Isn't it though? I remember in the monasteries, Lent, when you just had toast in the morning and you fasted, but this is fasting from normalcy.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question somebody sent us, and it's quite clearly this person has done some theological and research on Jesus. So I don't know exactly what it says. I'm just going to read it and you can respond to it. It says, what would Dr. Crossan say about the early Jewish belief that Jesus was God and the pre-first century Jewish literature like the parables of Enoch that show the Jewish ideas about a Son of Man figure that was identical with God? While Crossan's arguments make sense from a Roman religious and political world, what about the Jewish world in the first century?
Yeah, well, the first thing you'd have to say, of course, is that Matthew was a Jew, right? I mean, Matthew is not a Christian. Matthew is a Jew. So is Paul. Paul lived and died as a Jew. So did Jesus, of course. So these people were quite able to see, okay, in our tradition, for example, the firstborn son, the son, or the beloved son, is the heir. So in the Bible, for example, in Exodus, when God speaks about Israel as my son, nobody thought, ooh, there must be some kind of weird genealogy here. No, cross out son every time you want in the Bible and put in heir, H-E-I-R. That's what it meant, because firstborn son gets the family farm, firstborn son gets the throne. So to talk about Jesus as the Son of God means as heir of God. So I have no problem with using that language. And for me, Jesus is, let me put it this way. I think, honestly, Judaism should never have given away Jesus. I mean, they didn't, Christianity took over, let's say Gentile Christianity, took over the Old Testament, called it the Old Testament. Jews did not give up their scriptures. They shouldn't have given up Jesus. They should have insisted on him from Jewish theology.
Yeah.
And in Jewish theology, this is a manifestation of God. This is the image of God. This is what God looks like in sandals. All of that is in Jewish theology already. Now, if somebody wants to say, then can I call Jesus God? Yes, you can, if you know what you are doing. If you think that that means God died on Friday afternoon and the world, was without God until the resurrection, then I would say get a life or something like that,
Yeah.
Dictionary. No, but you're making a serious claim, and it could have been done within Judaism. And I've often thought, what would have happened if Judaism had not had those revolts against Rome, and Judaism had gone on for 300 years? I think what would have happened is Constantine would have looked around and said, well, they'll have to give on this thing about male circumcision but I think Judaism should be the religion of the Roman Empire. They've been at it a long time. They got some weird stuff in there, but we've weird stuff too. I think that would unify our Roman Empire, which is what Constantine wanted. So I wish in a way that Judaism had said, he is our Messiah. You can have him as your Messiah,
Yeah.
Because what actually happened is Judaism said he's not the Messiah. And then the book of Revelation came along and said, well, he is the Messiah, but he didn't get it right. So he's coming back on a war horse to get it right. So I don't think we were too happy with it either. So I would have loved to see what would happen if, without those revolts against Rome, they had said, all right, we're accepting his as the Messiah. We're going to go along with his nonviolent revolution against Rome. Yep, we're not going to knuckle down to Rome, but no, we won't make the danger of armed rebellion because they'll destroy us. It could have been very, very different all around.
Yeah. Wow. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Purely hypothetical.
Yeah.
One of the things you do as a historian is imagine what didn't happen. What ifs? You know what I mean? Because otherwise you think that what happened had to be absolutely, had to be. No way could Christianity not have become the religion of the Roman Empire. Of course it could not have.
Yeah. And I imagine that if Judaism had become that, it would, not to say this in a crass way, but it would have become the more diluted version, like Constantine, Paul, I would argue, diluted the original vision or changed the original vision of Jesus. That would have changed what the Jewish religion would have looked like to become a more Romanized, popular version. Right.
And that would have been the question. Now, in one sense, I'm going to say I would have trusted Judaism because they had 500 years of being under, the Assyrians, the Medes, the Persians, the Babylonians. They knew empire.
Yeah.
They knew the smell of empire. Now, it is always possible that you can be seduced, of course. Maybe somebody would have said, well, you see, what we wanted was a Jewish empire. And what we got was a pagan empire, but now we have a Jewish empire. Maybe. But they also had their tradition. Now, I don't see Paul, the authentic Paul, diluting Jesus one single whit. I think what he's doing is taking Jesus out into the great capital cities of the Roman Empire, putting it into a language, I don't just mean Greek, but a language that they will understand, because he's using their terminology. If he'd gone out and talked about Jesus as Messiah, Jesus as Messiah, Jesus as Messiah, the Romans would have yawned. They said, sure, Messiah, whatever. He said he's the Lord. Oh, they got that right away, because there's only one, the Lord. It would be like me walking around Washington saying, I wouldn't be doing it today, but I'm the president.
Yeah.
That would get everyone Secret Service would want to know, what exactly do you mean by that? So the language of Paul is exactly the right language for the great capital cities of the Roman Empire. If Jesus had been there, as it were, and telling parables, we wouldn't be talking about Jesus today.
Yeah.
Now, when you get to the letters that were written in Paul's name, 2nd Thessalonians, Colossians, Ephesians, 1st and 2nd, these are where, I don't even want to say dilution is going on. This is where Paul is being Romanized. This is the Romanization of a radical. He is being dragged, kicking and screaming, though he's dead, of course, into the Roman. Well, let's give a little on slavery. Just be kind to your slaves. Let's give a little on male superiority. Just be kind, love your wives.
Yeah.
Everything that you can see in those letters and in the Acts is pulling Christianity back into the Roman orbit. Maybe
Mm.
that's inevitable. It just is sad how fast it happened. And then it got canonized by some of those letters in the New Testament.
Yeah.
So maybe Judaism would have held out, and maybe it would have done exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's a good counterfactual.
Totally. So I have two more questions, but I kind of, we could talk for another 4 hours on this, but just on the Paul question again. So Paul's not changing the message of Jesus in the way that you understand things historically happening. But I do wonder, it does seem there is a controversy between Paul and James's vision of what Jesus was up to. And I mean, obviously one of the things that have been highlighted throughout history is James saying, hey, faith without works is dead. You can't be saved. And then Paul coming along and directly refuting that and saying, no, or it actually probably historically happened the other way around. But so why is there a difference between Pauline Christianity and that early Jamesian?
At the time of the Reformation, it suited Protestantism in criticizing Catholicism to put a nice, clear dichotomy between faith and works. Now, let me be blunt. It's an absurd dichotomy. It really is. You literally cannot have faith without works, but you can have works without faith. That's what Paul is after. Let me give a simple example. Somebody comes to this country as say a refugee, becomes a citizen, opens a shop and does very, very well. And every morning proudly puts up the American flag in gratitude to the country. I would call that faith and works. Now, supposing somebody down the block said, hey, this guy seems to be getting a lot of customers. That flag must help. I'd stick up the flag. Paul would call that works without faith. In other words, if you were a Christian, supposing I'm a Christian, and I just find out that everyone else seems to be a Christian, so I better start talking about it. So, yeah, Jesus is my Lord and Savior. I find that's good for business. Sure. Put up a crucifix. That would be works. So the dichotomy is not faith against works. Paul is completely convinced. He says in Philippians that that God works. What's the quotation I'm trying to think of? Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because it is God who is in you to believe and to work. For Paul, you couldn't have faith without works. That would mean he would have settled down quietly, minding his own business in Tarsus and lived a long life. Now, he can really attack, and he does attack, works without faith. In case somebody is just, Jesus says the same thing when he says, why do you say, Lord, Lord, and don't do what I tell you? That's in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. Why do you say, Lord, Lord? That's faith. And don't do what I tell you? That's lack of works. So James and Paul, like Protestants and Catholics in the Reformation, are locked in an absurd dichotomy. You got faith without works. Even Luther says, I think in his introduction to the Romans, you cannot have faith without works any more than you can have a fire without heat. But again, you could have works without faith. And that's what Luther would, of course, accuse the papacy of, all these, he said, those are works without any faith.
Yeah.
That's the real debate. Now, there's one other thing. Paul, I think, is too critical of law. He says quite rightly that law, and he doesn't just mean Jewish law, he means Roman law, because that's their great boast. Law can't change anything. The spirit must change. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But we find out that if you put in a law against discrimination, it doesn't change everyone's hearts. But maybe the next generation will grow up taking it for granted. So yeah, I mean, I would be happy if a law stops certain bad things happening, even if all people are saying, oh, I still think those people are inferior to me, but now I can't say it. Yeah, but after the law is around enough, it may change. So the law can change the spirit. So I'd want to say, be very careful about
Yeah.
saying, law can't do anything, law is useless. It's true. We all know that the sign that says 60 miles an hour doesn't automatically make me take my foot off the accelerator automatically. No, it may tempt me to put it up to 70. But maybe eventually we get used to doing it. So
Yeah.
I'd be careful with law, but it's not faith against works. That's really a phony one.
Yeah,
Really.
totally. So the last question, and it's a lot of people have been asking it, and I'm going to kind of add my little part to it. What is, if somebody's brand new to you and your work, what would be the first book you would want them to read? And then the second part of that question is, what has been, either spiritually or academically, what has been a book or two that has been most influential on your journey thus far?
Let me see, a tiny little book, because it's a paperback. It could easily be used. It's a Canadian paperback. Could easily be used for a discussion. It's called, terribly ironic title, A Short History of Progress. It's got nothing to do with religion, Christianity, or anything else. In fact, I was giving a talk along these lines in Canada, and somebody said, you should read this book. And very often when somebody says that, I think, oh, forget about it. This person came up the next day and said, here's a copy of it. Okay, it was a paperback. I started that on the way home in the plane. Remember planes? It is the best parallel story. It's just looking at human progress in the last 10,000 years and asking, is there progress? And how are we doing? Now, it's not religious. My suspicion is the person might be not the least bit interested in religion. I don't think it's hiding it or anything else. It's a small little book. It crystallized for me lots of stuff that I'd seen before, and it put it into a miniature form that anyone read. I recommend that, A Short History of Progress. You got it, Ronald Wright, exactly. I love that. It was lectures on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation originally. That was fast, by the way, very good. Yeah. Now, in my own, I suppose if you have some theological training, how to read the Bible and still be a Christian, is okay. If you're starting absolutely from scratch, then maybe Jesus, A Revolutionary Biography. I mean, my editors at Harper and I spend a lot of time trying to keep it simple, make it clear to people who might not know, anything about this beforehand. So sometimes it is a little bit difficult for me maybe to forget that, okay, I've spent my whole life here. And even if I'm making it clear, I never dumb it down. I've never, ever in my whole life tried to make something dumb down. I have tried to make it clear, or often tried to see, okay, now, instead of saying this in 100 words, can I get it down to 10 words so I get the most important stuff? So I work very hard on getting the most important stuff clear. And I apologize if I don't, but those at least would be ones to start with.
Yeah. I'll throw that last one up on the screen, Jesus, A Revolutionary Biography.
Yeah.
And the last question is, do you have any Discovery Channel or History Channel interviews coming up? Should we be on the lookout?
Let me see. One of the things that's happening recently is a huge amount of podcasts.
Okay.
And very often the podcasts, since I do a lot of work with visuals, this is a commercial message. What I've done is I have a series called The Challenge of Jesus, a 4-hour video series, and The Challenge of Paul. Now, they're not just me talking. These are with visuals, because I don't like just talking heads, sorry.
Yeah.
So the videos always are, they're done with green screen technology, which means I'm talking and the images are appearing simultaneously. So I would recommend, and I recommend for Easter, The Challenge of Jesus and The Challenge of Paul.
Okay.
And those are available from, this is the site you can find them, all one word, Faith and Reason. So all one word, faithandreason.org. not anything else, not common, not gov, .org, faithandreason.org. Because I've been doing as much with visual theology as with textual theology. That's it, Faith and Reason. You found it. You see them down there? There's something on the last week. There's something on the Challenger Paul. There's others as well. Roar.
Cool.
All the usual suspects are there.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Dr. Dominic Crossan, John Dominic Crossan, for joining me today. It's always good to be with you, and I'm really grateful for the work that you've done in the world to help shape my faith, and I know so many other people. And in the midst of isolation, thanks for taking time to be with us.
And to you and to everyone listening, have a healthy, happy, and holy Easter.
Likewise. Well, I hope you're well, and we'll see you again soon sometime.
Anytime, Brandon. Thank you.
Good to see you. Peace.